And so this idea that you're always looking at things from the point of view of I need data, I need validation, I need peer review. I always tell people, I'm like, if you're a cutting edge thinker, you don't have peers. Who's going to peer review you?
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
Einstein, and you're going to change the way physics is done. Nobody's peer reviewing you.
Right.
And here's where it's interesting. All right, so let's think about it this way. You walk into a physics classroom at MIT. You're sitting among some of the smartest people on planet Earth. Yes or no? Probably.
I mean, it's certainly the wittiest and quickest.
Right? So here's what's interesting. Now, if I was to sit in that class, I can assure you that I'd probably fail. Right? It's not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
Now, there's somebody in there that could sit in that classroom that could actually understand the material well enough to pass. There's going to be a guy next to him who's going to understand it so well that he's going to do great. There's going to be somebody there who's going to understand it to the point of view where he can write the textbook out in his head.
Yeah.
But once in a generation, there's going to be a guy in there who's going to say, this is all wrong. And he's
Yeah.
going to leap past it. Now, that guy doesn't have peers.
Right.
Right. And the way our world changes is when that guy who doesn't have peers shows up. And I'll give you an example of it right now, which people are not paying attention to. It's going to seem obvious after the fact, but look at Elon and look at Starlink, right? What Elon actually did with Starlink is he's reinvigorated the idea of real estate. Because now for the first time on Earth, you can move wherever you want and you can have access to the internet, which is what usually draws people back from going anywhere.
Huh. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that makes a ton of sense. I was a poker player for a little while, and one of my fantasies was that like I was going to just have a van and play online like poker. And one of the limits was that I couldn't get a connection like 10 years ago when I wanted to try and do this.
Right. So think about it this way, right? So real estate markets, I mean, in Toronto, it's insane. You don't even ask, right? It's so bad.
Oh yeah.
Now
yeah.
you look at it, you're like, Canada's a massive piece of real estate, geographically speaking, largest landmass out there. Parts that were basically uninhabitable before because you just needed to stay connected. And the reason I tell that to people, I say, every single one of us is a commuter these days. Just we commute digitally. You go to the office digitally. This is us right now. We're commuting digitally. Right.
Yep.
This couldn't be done. And so large parts of the land were basically uninhabitable because you just couldn't get there. But now you look at it and say, okay, Starlink comes out. You and your wife each get a Starlink account. Then you get a switch at a home that actually has dual ports, so you can connect both of them in. Now you have the speed of both Starlink satellites connected to one system. That's faster than most people's internet at home anywhere you go.
Is it really that good?
It is good. It's
Wow.
really, really that good. Now, again, caveat to be taken into account is that obviously if the weather's bad, you're probably going to have some issues. But it went from I have no internet to I have internet, right?
Yeah.
And now I have really fast internet. That's a big change. Now, when that starts to propagate and people start to recognize that, you know what, I could just live further out and it's cheaper to buy a house out there, which means I can actually start to own equity, which means I could actually start to become financially independent relative to being in the rat race in the city. That's a change. That's one data point that actually flips the entire conversation. That's phase shift from old context, pre-iPhone, to new context. Oh, every smartphone now looks like the iPhone.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So those type of phase changes, that's the asymmetries that I'm always looking for. It's like what's happening here that's entirely different than what used to happen. Because what we're human beings, our natural inclination is map what you see against what you already know. Right? It's not true. The world doesn't work that way. The world works in a much more complex way. In that the way it unfolds, opportunities show up that you never saw coming, and it's only obvious after the fact. Right? Which is why, and here's where I find that the arrogance of it hilariously easy to spot, which is that every single person these days who is engaged in what we call presentism, the idea that I'm going to judge George Washington because he owned slaves.
Oh yeah.
Right. I'm like, listen, you probably can't do 2 push-ups, right? And you live in your mom's basement, and you think you're so incredibly smart that for the vast majority of human history that nobody's thought what you just thought. Right. And the reason you think what you think is not because you're a genius, it's because that's what's been built around you. Right. You're living in that water that's been cleaned and filtered, and you think all water should have been cleaned and filtered. Yes. Meanwhile, if you lived 500 years ago, or if you lived 100 years ago, hell, if you lived 50 years ago, you probably would have been one of those racist people who actually hit black people on the streets. So please get off your moral high horse. And let me tell you another story. Mm-hmm. You're not actually on a moral high horse. You're actually on a donkey, and you're riding it backwards. You just think you're on a moral high horse, right?
Well, it's the benefits and the comfort that have been unearned by the people who have them that don't understand the things that were required to survive in previous days. It's like the largesse that we live in that are on the backs of everybody who came before us that are all of a sudden these moral monsters.
Yeah, it's hilarious because, like I said to you, think about we discussed earlier with regards to how many grandparents and nth generation grandparents you had to have just to be born.
Yeah.
And my culture, the reason I know this viscerally a lot more effectively than most people around me is this, right? I come from a province in Afghanistan that had the Northern Alliance built into it. So we were the only people who fought the Taliban before the Americans came in. The leader of the Northern Alliance, his name was Ahmad Massoud. His team single-handedly was fending off the Taliban for years before the Americans came. When the Americans came, they basically, the Taliban sent in a camera crew to interview Ahmad Massoud, and they put a bomb in one of the cameras, and that's how they killed him. Right?
Oh,
right. Now, that same province to this day is actually where the resistance continues. Even after Kabul fell, that province in Panjshir, which is the reason it works is it's geographically locked. When the winter comes, you're not going to survive there because it's mountainous, it's crazy cold, and if you're going to go and you're going to survive and you're going to put up a resistance, and I hate that word because Twitter ruined it, but if you're going to put up a resistance, that's where you put it up. Now, the reason I know that and I recognize that fact is that people who live under those circumstances, sleeping 3-4 hours a night, traveling constantly, engage in various issues of battle, literally for life and death. Yes. The lessons you learn from that are totally different from, oh my God, I went into Yogan today and they didn't have my flavor. I feel so oppressed, right? It's like the contrast couldn't be more. And the level of contempt that you can generate from just recognizing that couldn't be more. But you also recognize the fact that, you know what, this is beautiful.